Welcome to Lead Smarter, the podcast where you'll hear powerful, no-nonsense conversations about leadership with today's top experts and real-world leaders like yourself. Get the inside strategies, insights, and secrets they've learned on the journey to lead smarter. Let's dive in. On today's episode of Lead Smarter, I'm joined by Matt Racz, founder of Founders That Scale, and a guide for leaders navigating one of the hardest transitions in business, the leap from scrappy startup to scalable company. Matt's not just a coach, he's a co-founder who's built, exited, and embedded himself in high-growth teams. He helps founders evolve from reactive operators to intentional executives, and he does it by rolling up his sleeves, sitting in on meetings, diagnosing bottlenecks, and helping build real strategic infrastructure. We're talking about that oh shit moment when growth stops feeling good, burnout's knocking, your team's stretched, and it's time to evolve or implode. Let's get into it. Hey, Matt, thank you for jumping on the call with me with the Lead Smarter podcast. It's really exciting to get a chance to talk to you again. I've really enjoyed the past few weeks of getting a chance to chat with you about your business, about your passion for leadership and the companies that you support. I'd love to hear more from you about Founders at Scale and the opportunity that you've noticed in out there for companies that need this kind of support from you. I know that your background is in building companies at a institutional level of developing the infrastructure and the resources needed. And so when you went from having built companies yourself, what was the inflection point where you saw that this was the kind of thing you wanted to take out and do yourself and help companies scale their own businesses?
Hey, thank you so much, Dave. I think it's having gone through the hero's journey, the cycle, a number of times. And that cycle can be very lonely. It could be incredibly exhausting, massive burnout, a lot of sacrifice, health, relationships, et cetera, when you're really trying to build something from the scratch, a scrappy startup, you're building technology, especially if it's your first time as a founder, you just don't know what you don't know. And you're highly passionate, you're rolling your sleeves up, you're willing to do literally whatever it takes, but the gap of where you are and the vision you have is massive in terms of skill set and just your ability to execute and get there, the funding. You're essentially in survival mode the whole time. And if you're a first time founder with other founders or co founders who are also first time at this, everyone's getting used to understand what their role is in the company. You're getting used to how to collaborate with each other, how to build product and test it, getting used to managing finances and a runway and your monthly burn rate and all that kind of stuff. And you just keep going through this hero's journey, right? You go through the trials and tribulations, and it really tests you. Like it, and I'll just speak for myself, it has tested me more than I ever thought. I oftentimes think that your romantic relationships are oftentimes your greatest teacher, your greatest mirror. And I would also say that your relationships in business, particularly with your founders or co-founder, are your greatest teachers and mirrors in life for growth, personal growth and learning and all that kind of stuff. And it could be both exhilarating doing it together, but it can also be incredibly lonely at the same time. And what I experienced going through building, I co-founded my first startup when I was 22. I was highly passionate. We grew that. We exited in 2019 and then went and started coaching and helping other founders of other companies kind of go through the experience, right? Like kind of passing the elevator back down in terms of knowledge and just being there as a soundboard. And then I went through the cycle again with another startup where I became a partner in their company and they were electrically fast growing. I mean, they had not raised any capital, were fully bootstrapping and highly profitable. And at the time when I was coaching them, it became pretty clear that they had achieved product market fit. And what had got them to that point was starting to collapse because they were growing so fast and they were really only wearing the hat of a founder and like, hey, I'm building a product, I'm trying to survive, we're getting early traction, but they weren't able to pull back because you're just in the day to day. It's no fault really to anyone. Like, I'm not trying to shame or judge any of that. It's just the natural cycle, in my opinion. This is like a universal cycle for startups and their growth. I like to think of them as a spiral. You kind of hit a lot of success and you're like, oh shit. You start coming back down and you hit this kind of descent and it feels very chaotic. You almost feel like you're losing control, spinning out of control. You start working harder, you burn out, you start operating in silos. It can be really intense. And to break through, you have to have a certain set of skills, awareness, and really to slow down and speed up And it's in those moments where you realize you need to start institutionalizing your business. You can't just focus on growth for growth's sake. You can't just focus on building product and bringing more customers. You really need to start building a company, not a product and earning revenue. It has to be a systemic infrastructure you're building intentionally that's sustainable for these startups to really turn into a scale up without imploding. So the long-winded answer to all this,
Yeah.
why start doing founders at scale is because I truly just believe that when they say a huge majority of startups and small businesses fail over the course of their lifetime, I truly believe it's just because they don't know how to navigate that critical inflection point when they hit this part where where they want to take off and do a breakthrough, they collapse. And it could be for a number of reasons. They run out of money, whatever it might be. They don't institutionalize their business. They don't hire correctly or onboard correctly, whatever it might be. There's universal characteristics at that point that you need to address. And most companies and most founders at that point they're not thinking about those things. It's like you don't know what you don't know, or they have neglected those parts of their business so much, like, neglecting HR, not thinking about onboarding and developing their people
Right.
and scaling the organizational chart. It's something that has been neglected and really needs to be looked at. It's not like a nice to have anymore. It's a must have. So I'm very passionate about helping companies become more successful in actually fulfilling their mission. And I believe that we live in a world where it's more important now than ever, especially like conscious founders, conscious businesses, organizations who are actually trying to make a difference in the world and create things that the world truly needs. We need to empower leaders of these businesses with the proper skills and infrastructure to take their business to the next level and actually succeed without them feeling like they have to do it on their own. Because, like I said, it could be very, very lonely. So that's my passion. I hope you can kind of feel my
Sure.
it. Um,
Yeah.
that's why I got into this space.
I mean, I'll say I really loved the description you had of it, where it's maybe a common path that most practically all businesses go through. In that, after product market fit, the trajectory, and then having to change from just being a product or a service to a real business. I've gone through the process myself multiple times. I've had several clients where I've watched them go through it, and interestingly enough, going through it myself, I don't feel necessarily less scared the next time I'm going through it. It doesn't feel like it's, yeah, I maybe I got through it once, but it doesn't feel like now I've got the tools to get through it alone again. It's a new set of problems, a new organization, new people. And I feel like when I've gone through it multiple times, I had to solve that all over again. And it felt just as lonely and just as scary the second time for me. And so, like, hearing you describe it, like, yeah, if I think it would feel very different as a founder if I just had someone who's gone through it as well and could see it maybe from, because as a founder, I'm so close to the problem that I'm still gonna focus on like what's urgent, what's right in front of me, because it's still urgent and I don't yet have that business in place and those processes in place that I know I can rely on. So I don't feel like I can let go yet, and it's like I'm holding on to the gears of the plane all the way into the ground. So I love that you can, like, the kind of help you would be able to provide is the navigator that tells you pull up.
I think I couldn't agree more with you, and I oftentimes feel that, a lot of the support that early founders, first-time founders, and even, like, seasoned founders, it's not just the first time and early ones, but especially when you're going through the cycle your first, second, even third time,
Yeah.
it could feel performative if you have, advisors or, a board who's trying to mentor you, or you graduate in an accelerator, a startup accelerator, and you've got these people around you. It can feel very performative where you can't actually be authentic about your real issues and what's going on because people are looking at your business and they're evaluating you. They're evaluating if you're going to be able to raise more capital. They're evaluating if you're the right team. They're evaluating your performance, and it can be really challenging, I think, for a founder and a founding team to really get like real support who's truly an objective third party, but has their best interests in them and can really support them in thinking correctly and just helping them make better decisions, slowing down, understanding how to play the game a little bit better, just being the navigator to your point, not here to steer the ship for them and make critical decisions, but to really be that soundboard so they can come to a place where they feel centered, they feel stable, they're confident. They might have to make very difficult decisions that only they can make in that role, and that is their
Right.
job, right? They're on the field. They're on the field playing the game, but the goal is to really equip them with more wisdom and structure and confidence, so when they're making those decisions, it's not just in the best interest of maybe the pressure that's being put on them from external sources or even internally, but they're really thinking holistically and approaching it from a place of their core values, not just the core values of the business. And, we put them up on a website and all that kind of stuff, but really thinking about like, what are their virtues? How do they want to show up in their business leadership? And that really requires you to graduate and become initiated from like a founder leader to an executive leader. And that's not really trained at all, right? Like there's so much education out there on how to, scale and bring in more customers, how to enhance your marketing messaging, even operational systems. But when you really think about scaling the leadership of a company and helping them institutionalize their business and to do it in a way that's sustainable and feels correct for the whole company, that is an art as much as it is science. And it really requires proper like connection with those founders to help them think about the game more, not just intelligently, but really more from like their heart as well.
How do you so I as a founder, I've been in the space where I know conceptually I need to step back. Like I think most founders who do any sort of like self-reflection, get any advice, they know that they have to figure out a way to step out and be able to work on the business rather than in it. There's like all the cliches out there that they are painfully aware is true. But what is a way you can help a founder that is locked in the I'm the only one that can do this. I need to do the things that are urgent and therefore I never do the things that are transformative. But then I also recognize if I don't, nobody will. So my business is just never going to get to that next level unless I make that shift.
Sure. It's a really challenging leap of the mind because as not all founders this way, but in that example, for a founder who's like really holding on to their response, it's an ego thing, right? Like I want to hold on to the things that I feel like I'm really good at. I can't trust other people, or I just don't have the right staffing in place to delegate things out, or I'm
Right.
just so exhausted and burnt out and at full capacity to even think about that. That's a whole project. How do I accomplish this project? So the first thing is really connecting with the founder to understand like truly what is going on. Like what is the current status of the business? What is the financial health? How is the team structured? How are the relations between you and your other co-founders? Are you guys siloed? Are you guys meeting correctly? Are you on the same page? Do you actually even know what your strategic roadmap is? There needs to be some sort of assessment of like what's currently happening in order to make a proper, assessment on how to move forward. We can't just come in and start like pulling things apart and dictating what should happen. It
Right.
really does require some sort of evaluation, and it could be a quick evaluation. I'm not saying this is like a 2-month thing, right? We can get this done in a week to 2 weeks, especially with how I like to work with my clients. I could do just very simple one-on-one coaching once a week, and that's very standard in the space. But something that I'm very passionate about that I don't see really anyone else doing is I actually do more of like a strategic partnership where I will embed myself for the first month to 3 months and I'll attend meetings with them. I'll offer up to 5 hours a week where I'm actually sitting in and assessing how they're running their meetings. I'll evaluate their books. Like I will come in and actually look at what's happening, not to dictate to them what needs to happen, but to help
Right.
them start thinking more strategically. So I think practically speaking, right? It's like the assessment's a nice part of like a process. Hey, this is what we do and how we do it. But practically speaking, this means that we need to really start moving the founder away from a doer and like a day-to-day executor. And there's different tools and frameworks, right? Like
Mhm.
to do this and to do it very quickly. But it has to come down to the founder first being willing and having a desire to grow. They have to have a willing and a desire to grow, and they have to realize that them not scaling themselves and delegating things out is literally collapsing their business and their potential. And if they can't make that mental leap, there's nothing I can do or anyone else can do to help them get there. They have to come to that inner flame to say something needs to change and it's actually me. It's not just my team is hitting capacity. I have hit capacity. So
Right.
I need to elevate my leadership. And if I'm going to do that so I can start looking down and observing and building my business, I just naturally have to hand things off. And that might require pumping the brakes a little bit and slowing down, which is, I think, every founder's worst nightmare. They think they need
Yeah.
to be running 1,000,000 miles an hour.
I was actually gonna ask you that because I've heard you mention a couple of times through this, you've kind of flagged that slowing down might be it can be often something that is required to get through this process, and I completely align with the fact that that is, like, I can't sell that very easily internally if I've got a team. I'm just gonna pump the brakes, guys. I'll figure it out, and, however that impacts us, don't worry about it. That's not an easy message to sell. Or you're a founder that maybe you're a solo founder, you don't have anybody that you're collaborating with internally, and it's just you having to buy that yourself. Like, I've got to slow down, and it sounds like a death sentence. Like sharks, can't sleep without dying, or you know what I mean. Like you hear that, it's like that's kind of what it feels like. Like if I slow down, it's basically like giving up and getting ready to close shop.
Yeah, I think, the best thing to do then in that case is to ask your team if that makes sense. You don't have to be the only one making a decision, but I think if you are truly operating at a speed that's unsustainable and truly as a founder, you don't even have time to hand things off, you don't have the people in place, then you're actually the bottleneck. You are moving too fast because you truly think that you need to. And we're sold this story that we have to do growth for growth's sake. And it's actually a liability at a certain point. It'll get you to move faster, and when you move faster, you can be hastier to achieve certain things. But
Right.
you will hit a point if you're not building proper infrastructure along the way, it will collapse or you're gonna burn your team out. So, my counterpoint to that would be, great, the founder feels that, you know, "My ego is gonna take a hit, I can't just pump the brakes, this is gonna be really challenging."
Yeah.
I'm not saying to pump the brakes and stop selling and building product and running a business. But what I am saying is you need to slow down the things you're currently doing because you're likely just running on a wheel. And if you are constantly moving at that speed, that means that your nervous system is jacked up. You are moving at a pace that where your nervous system is in straight fight or flight, likely all the time. And I will say this till I die, but the leadership team is the nervous system of the company. So if the leaders of the company are in survival mode, they're moving way too fast or they're not available, and they could be not even really aware of this. It's not to shame it or judge it, right? It can come from really good intentions. But if they're moving so fast that they can't actually build the company in a way that the rest of the team actually needs, they're not being a solid leader at that point. They're missing the mark because they think they need to perform. It's not about performing. Business is not a performance. Are not a performance, right? And so
Right.
as we start looking at that, we can go, it's just my ego saying that if I pump the brakes, everything's gonna fall apart, or I set these crazy lofty goals for this year, what's gonna happen there? It's not about not achieving revenue targets and growth and building the business, et cetera. What it's about is actually building a business that can scale.
Right.
And that's the reframe for founders. It's like if you really want to scale and get to the next level jump, it's not just working harder. And dear God, if you keep making your team work harder and wear more hats and take more on because you can't take a beat to be strategic, to actually look at your business through the lens of reality, it's gonna really hurt the culture long term, or you're just gonna keep hitting a ceiling and never be able to actually break through. You're either gonna break down or break up, right?
Right.
People are gonna leave, or the company's not gonna do as well. You're gonna do a down round or whatever, right? So that's kinda my perspective and my rebuttal to that.
Okay, well, I one of the things you also mentioned I liked, and you talk about business and setting up the infrastructure to scale, and you also I've heard you mention a couple of times you discuss almost like culture and values. You didn't say it directly connected, but it sounds like they're associated. It sound to me the way you describe it sounds like you're effectively equating culture and values as part of the infrastructure that makes the business more efficient. And I recognize that as I've always looked at it that way myself, and it's always been something that like I know I need to get to, and I also think of it as something that always gets basically sidelined, especially when you're trying to get product market fit and you're just trying to get to the next sale and you're trying to make sure that there is a there. You've then basically always put on the back burner the cultural values, let's just call it like the soft skill infrastructure of the business that tells people who you are as a business, but also tells your internal people who you are so that you can operate within a framework that makes you more efficient. Is that like, often something that you would do with founders at scale that, like, once they've reached product market fit, you kind of incorporate that as part of your infrastructure work that you do with them?
Yeah, it's funny because right when you're on the journey, you're climbing the mountain, you're basically, like, in survival mode, and everyone's just it's wartime,
Yep.
everyone's just like, "Hey, like, I'm in, like, let's rock." It's fun, it's chaotic, it's a lot of dopamine, like, it's one of the most fun stages to be in because the culture is so scrappy and everyone's so willing to invest so much time into building something. They believe in the vision. It's really cool to see. So I'm not trying to again judge that part of the process, but it's oftentimes during that phase you're not really thinking about because it's not the right time. You're not really thinking about the things like, hey, what's our 5-year plan and like, what are our core values of a company and because you're not thinking about scaling your the team, right? When you start thinking about scaling your team and developing them and you're being like, hey, we're going to be here for the next 10 years. We actually have an opportunity to do this. We've now earned we've gone through the battle and we've achieved and won so many battles that we're now earning the right where we can grow this thing and be a big player, right? That inflection point is where this comes into play. It's not when, you've got a few clients and you're just starting out and you've got a scrappy young team. It's important to have that but you're going to know really quick at that point. It's just a small team. Like if the culture is not good and people are treating each other poorly, you're gonna have a conversation about it because it's too high risk and high pressure for things to not be working because of
Right.
culture,
Yep.
right? But when you hit that inflection point and you're like, "Hey, we need to start scaling and bringing more team members on," it's an operational framework. It's a scaling framework, and I didn't realize that my first go around. I thought, like, core values and culture were kinda like this nice thing. You do it once, you put it in a Google Doc and don't look at it, you put it on your website and all that kinda stuff. And it's kinda like, as a man, not having core values or virtues. Imagine living your life without knowing what your core values or virtues are as a man. Well, how are you
Yeah.
making decisions? When shit hits the fan and things are going crazy and you're in chaos, you're in the storm, how are you remaining stable and making proper decisions that feel aligned with your heart, not just reacting? And how are you thinking about who's in your inner circle? Who shouldn't be in your inner circle as a man, as a human?
Right.
Right? The same is with business. And so as you start thinking about, okay, we need to now scale this organization, your core values and the virtues of the company, the culture is how you scale what works. You need to scale the DNA of your company. It needs to do this, and it needs to do it in a way that it's not the founder or the founding team hand-holding everyone. That's not scalable, right? So
Yeah.
everyone needs to be hired and fired off of core values in the culture. It's a code of ethics of how you create, how you collaborate, how you scale, how you address conflict, how you treat each other, how you think about your customers. It's really like the energetic frequency of the business, kind of like a soul. So,
Yeah.
without getting so spiritual and esoteric about it, like, I really feel that that inflection point, it's such a fun exercise because it actually matters at that point because you can connect it to purpose. You can connect it to a purpose, meaning it's actually practical now to go through that exercise because you need to
Right.
hire people or you need
Yep.
to let people go. How do you do that? We have a framework now where we can point to values and virtues that we operate off of, and we're not just making, you know, subjective decisions and people are like, "This is unfair," and it creates risk. This is how you scale your company from a people standpoint.
One of the things I've heard you do throughout this conversation is you talk about the business almost in a biological way, but like almost like as an extension of the people within it. So it's what happens in the business to the people, founders, for example, being the central nervous system of it. The culture values being almost like the energetic spirit of the business. It sounds like you've look at it in a way that extends from the founder and what would ultimately be the people in it out as if it itself is an organism, if that makes sense. It's alive. And the way you talk about it sounds like the passion reflects something that is living that you care about. Just reflecting on how you communicate about it, is that kind of the mindset that you have about it when you're talking with people? Is that kind of or am I just putting things together that aren't necessarily a good fit?
No, no, you're hitting the mark. It's not like my own concept. I remember years ago just thinking about this, like, oh, you can't sue really the CEO or the people of the business. You have to sue the business because the business is a person. I'm like, what? Like a business is treated like a person? Like now I was like, oh, a business is a person. I get it now. Okay, cool. It's like all the people are cells, and you got different departments which are different organs, and they're all collaborating to make this thing work. And it
Right.
starts out as like a little, seed, and then it grows. And it's a very, I think, easily approachable concept, but,
Right.
you know, that also comes down to it's not just like the cellular nature and the soul of the business and the organs and the departments, how everyone's working together, but it's also like, what's your North Star? How are you making decisions? How are you interacting with other organisms? Right,
Right.
and with your environment, right? And this kinda touches on the B Corp nature of things. I'm a, you know, I'm a bit of a proponent for B Corps. I think they're really cool. I think what they stand for is really interesting. Allowing yourself to put purpose over profit, even at, like, the executive level, and you're buying
Right.
that. It's very fascinating. But I think if we can think about, the health of the business, like the health of a living being, an organism, then we take it way more seriously. It's like, "Oh, everything is connected." This isn't just, imagine smoking 20 packs a day and thinking that you're healthy, right?
Right.
You're doing something you think is, it feels good, etcetera, but, like, you're literally destroying the cells of your body. You're creating cancer and toxins, right? So you don't wanna do things that are jeopardizing the organism as a collective, right? And
So
I
you basically come in as a doctor, is what you're saying. You're
yeah.
basically a doc.
Yeah, we're doing the assessment, right? And we're really
That's
looking at
right.
the health of the organism. And, I think it's really fascinating when a company is even at a later stage, when they're past product market fit.
Right.
Product market fit is you are just a scrappy team, you've achieved something. We need to now institutionalize and grow. But once you get to that growth phase, that next phase where you've been around for a while and you've scaled, you've built the infrastructure, and now it's just about like, hey, let's get more growth capital. We figured this out. If we just get more capital, we can scale these systems. We can hire, better VPs to help bring this thing to fruition. That to me is the point where this organism, mindset makes the most sense. Like, like that analogy, it's like, okay, you've got departments now that are literally working together. They're
Right.
formalized. Everyone's cranking, you're institutionalized. At that point, the question is, well, how healthy is the organism? Doesn't need to be refactored at all. When you're a startup, I think the analogy of the central nervous system of the founders makes the most sense
Gotcha.
because at that point, it's just, hey, you guys were in survival, perhaps. How do we get you into a more thrival state, right? Like where you guys are all thriving. We need to institutionalize things, restructure. We need to get the nervous system aligned, right? To get ready for the growth.
Right.
That's kind of how I come on and work with different stages of companies.
Well, you advise companies at different stages. You advise founders how to navigate some of the challenges and experiences you've already had yourself, and you kind of see the other end of it. As we start to get towards like the later part of this conversation, I'd love to know, well, if you had a chance to advise yourself when you were younger, before you had these experiences, you could only take back literally one piece of advice to try to get the most bang for your buck out of it. You only had a chance to give yourself 30 seconds to give one piece of advice before you shot back to the future. What would that piece of advice be?
That is a fantastic question. The one piece, what comes to heart, I suppose, would be to not feel like you have to do it alone. I would have asked for more help in my business. I would have checked my ego and my doubt, my uncertainty, my all the things that creep in to you as a human. I would have looked at them a little bit more and been kinder, and I would have approached my founding team more strategically, and I would have spoken up way more around things I would have spoke my truth a lot more in business. Because when you're in a high scale, high intensity, high risk environment, a lot of pressure, you got funding, people have invested in you, you're building a team. There's just a lot of pressure, and sometimes you don't even want to rock the boat,
Right.
And so for me, I think it would have been really doing the deeper work to be a true leader in the company and not just a builder, but to really transcend that because I think I limited my company's growth. I limited my growth by not looking at those things as early as I wish I had. And it took me even my second time around to really even realize that that's what was needed.
Uh,
So that would be the advice.
Well, I know that you gave yourself more than 30 seconds, so you totally cheated, but you brought up something that I struggle with as well, which you mentioned that you wish you would, maybe stepped into a leadership role more sooner and, rather than spent so much time being a builder. I don't know how to naturally make that evolutionary jump without it just happening in whatever time it's gonna take, because for me, I've always known that that was the biggest leap for me as well. And I can still find myself every once in a while feeling a little bit more comfortable if I sit back in the builder space. I'm not extending myself out where there's a lot less known, and I'm really putting myself out there, and what fails really hits me. And then by nature, all of my team, but it's my fault that it hit them. So it's hard for me to know how do you like. And I brought this up before, but like you would tell yourself to step forward and be a leader sooner. But
Mhm.
how would you have convinced yourself to have done that?
Yeah, how to convince yourself, right? It needs to be something you start seeing that again, you are the actual bottleneck, right? Like when you really start seeing that your limitation, your limits to your own growth is what's causing your business to stagnate and create chaos within the company. That just has to be at some point I have to look at myself in the mirror. And it's really hard as a founder, as a business person to look at yourself in the mirror and go, I need to grow because it's constantly, hey, you're not doing your job. You're not hitting your KPIs. You're not hitting milestones. We've got this competitor. It's such a wartime game, and so to me, it's also reframing, what is building. Oftentimes I think a lot of founders love building product, or, you've got a founder who might love building product. You have a founder who might
Sure.
love building systems. You might have a founder who loves building people or revenue, right? Building revenue
Yeah.
systems, selling, right? So there's different things that people will gravitate towards that are necessary to get a business off the ground. There's building, and we can call that deep work. Okay, like Cal Newport, deep work. Great book, great concept, especially for founders early days. A lot of your time is deep work. You're building things and you're behind the keyboard programming, or you're on the phones, you're talking, you're selling, you're doing the things that need to get done. And eventually there's a point, there is another, and this is kind of like why I talk about the spiral, because it feels like you're hitting this amazing, you're on a rocket ship and you're going, you're like, holy shit, I took off. And
Right.
you do this loop, right? And this comeback down is where you start realizing, oh, I'm neglecting certain things, or I need to start handing things off. You can't keep just doing this. That's not natural. Nature
Right.
does spirals. Nature literally works in cycles.
Right.
So we need to get back to nature, right? So we have to understand that beating at a drum consistently and thinking that we're just going to have linear growth at all times is just not realistic. There needs to be periods of spiraling, learning, and coming back up. And that's fantastic. So, one of the tools I like to use with my founders is a very simple tool, but it's just a ABCD rule. Take a list, get a piece of paper, write down all the things in column A that only you can do that you love doing.
Right.
So easy. Like, what do you just love doing that only you should and can do? B, what are the things you enjoy doing, but maybe you really shouldn't do? C, what are the things you don't really enjoy doing, but you're doing? Right? Like, and you just map these things out, and
Right.
literally everything that's in B, C, or D, you have to delegate out because those things are eating up your capacity to be strategic and to go all in on the things that you need to do. Like your company, your team needs you to be performing at your best.
Right.
Right? So it's not just that you as the founder and a leadership team need your team to be performing. Very rarely do we ever look in the mirror and go, how am I performing? How am I leading this company? And can I be true about that? Can I be real about how I'm approaching this? Maybe I'm not as good as I think I've been, you know, and that's okay. So to me, it's about really looking at, areas in which you should be building and things that you should not be building, right? And there's, areas where I think founders who are really good at building product, and that's fantastic, but sometimes they need to maybe relinquish control to be more strategic to push the business forward at a certain point, right? And so instead of building the product, they're building the team. They're building the strategy. So they can still be builders. I'm not saying to not be a builder, like you need to keep
Right.
building the company. And I think it's just understanding there's a level jump. If you want to take your business to the next level, you literally need to evolve with your business, or the business is either going to outpace you or it's going to just keep hitting you as the limiter of the business. And it's hard to hear.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned basically the antidote to it is looking in the mirror. So for it's tough because when you are the founder, especially if you're by yourself, you can really empower excuses because who's going to challenge you? So it's like, okay, well, that means I have to really accept. And what I loved about the growth, like, and the trend of growth, and it can't be linear, is that I basically have to accept what the limitations are and the path of growth, so that I can accept when things turn down, make changes, acknowledge that's a situation, and continue in in a sustainable trajectory that is natural. Which, even if you're terrified of it, it doesn't mean that that wasn't naturally what was gonna happen. One of the things I wanted to ask, you were already kind of, as I was kind of wanting to get some insights from you before we ended the podcast, I was gonna ask you what books you would recommend, and you already actually brought one of them up, which was Deep Work. But for other leaders, besides that book, what are other books you might recommend to a leader who's kind of gotten past the market fit phase, and now they're starting to try to learn about themselves and learn about how to navigate this new space?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many amazing books out there. I think if you're like a very practical like startup book is Scaling People. It's by
Okay.
Stripe Press, the company Stripe, the payment processor, and they write
Hmm.
amazing books. They've written like High Growth Formula or the High Growth Playbook. They've written all sorts of amazing books to help you actually scale your company. And so I think Scaling People is a really foundational book for founders and leaders who want to look at how do we not just scale the revenue and the operations, but how do you really systematize and create a powerhouse culture and company and hiring, like the whole people machine of your business. It's
Right.
basically a playbook for that. So it's a fun read. It's got a lot of, worksheets and stuff. So I would definitely recommend that. And then quite honestly, I think that instead of even reading books, I would just shout out a app called Heroic, and
Okay.
it's where I have learned probably 95% of my coaching material, like, and less about business and more about peak performance, mindset capacity, leadership development, and evolution. Book is founded by this guy, Brian Johnson, not the dude who's out there trying to live to 150 or whatever.
Sure.
It's this other guy, Brian Johnson, who's just a living legend. And what he's done is he built a company originally called Optimize, and he's rebranded to Heroic. And he's basically read every single book on leadership, spirituality, peak performance, mindset, literally every amazing topic a founder or high performer would want to engage with. And
Right.
then he created what are called philosopher's notes. And so these notes will be the top 5 big ideas of every single book. So any leadership book you can possibly think of, he's done a philosopher's note on, and then what he'll do is he'll create like a 101 course on, like an hour-long course of the top 10 big ideas on a whole theme. So it could be like confidence 101, leadership 101, sleep 101, motivation 101, like all these 101s that take all the biggest ideas across some of the greatest thinkers of our time and ancient times, right? He brings in stoicism. I mean, it's really foundational level wisdom that he
Wow.
distills away that is so incredibly like accessible. So I would just give his platform a huge shout out. It is remarkable and it's so cheap. I think it's like $20 a month or something like that. It's so cheap for what you're getting. It's like mind blowing.
That sounds awesome. I will definitely be checking it out. Thanks for sharing. Before we go, people that are listening to this that maybe have aligned, resonate with things that you've shared, how would you like them to get in touch with you to get help from you directly in growing their businesses and take it to the next level?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate the opportunity. You can go to my website, they can learn all about like the services I offer. They can dive more into my mindset and how I think about scaling businesses and founders. It's founders@scale.com. And then my email is matthew@founders@scale.com as well. And then, of course, they can certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there as well. And those would be the primary channels to grab my attention.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt, for your time, for joining us, and for sharing everything about your experience and the journeys that you help with others that are trying to get through their own experiences in business and getting to the next level. Really appreciate your time. Looking forward to chatting with you again, but thanks for joining us on the podcast. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Lead Smarter. And thank you to the partners and sponsors who believe in our mission to evolve ourselves to elevate others. Speaking of elevating others, if you liked this episode, please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and share.
It would mean a lot to me and the team that works so hard behind the scenes so we can all learn together. And of course, thank you to the expert guests who kindly join us as generous guides on our journey to lead smarter.